if, you know, by chance you want to watch it again, great, let me know. And if, you know, there's enough interest in having something future, we can certainly plan that. It's really just meant to support us as we're all getting started in this journey. So I'm going to pass everything off to Kathy. And like I said, I'll chime in and just read questions as they come up at the chat box. But Kathy, it's all you.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for your interest and for joining. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kathy Johnston, and I am a speech-language pathologist and a practicing speech path and have been for over 30 years. I spent the first 10 years or so working with Oklahoma City Public Schools and in skilled nursing facilities and in birth to 3 in Oklahoma. My husband moved up to Kansas. I came to work for PRN with Children's Mercy, Children's TLC, went to work for Shawnee Mission Public Schools, and then came to work for KU Med as a clinical instructor. And then KU put me at a site called the Children's Place, which is a site for children who have been significantly abused and neglected and are suffering trauma due to that. And I was a clinical instructor there and the speech path of record. And then when the chairs started getting thrown across the room and I was using a cane to fend them off, I thought, well, it's time to look for something else. And teletherapy is where I was drawn, and I went to work for Greenbush doing teletherapy. And I've been doing teletherapy with pretty much elementary, some middle school kids in high school for the last couple of years for Greenbush, and then part-time before that for other agencies as well. I am ESDM trained and PESDM trained for working with children with autism. I also have a significant amount of hand-in training, more than words, and it takes two to talk. I also work a lot with individuals who stutter, as well as individuals that have severe phonological issues or childhood apraxia speech. So those of us who've been speech paths for over 30 years end up finding different things that we're drawn to, and so we research it. So Monica and I started talking about teletherapy, and I said, you know, it's really not rocket science. It's been around for a long time, and if you look at the ASHA website, there's a lot of information about it on the ASHA website. But we thought, well, let's go ahead and start with people who may not know anything about it versus those people who may know quite a bit about it. So we're going to start at the very early level, young level, new beginner level, and then we'll progress upwards as we go. I'm going to go ahead and share the screen with you with a document that I created to kind of help guide the conversation a little bit. And sharing the screen is something that we can do with Zoom. And as I share the screen with you, one of the things that I do before I start any of my virtual sessions is I get in touch with my person I'm going to be Zooming with, which in my case usually is a para on the other end or a school district. And I make sure that we have the equipment necessary and the software necessary to do what we want to do. If we're starting something new and zooming into homes, which I am also doing now, I'm zooming into homes, and I've done several sessions of practice so far. My district is on spring break this week, so we're not doing any virtual training yet, but I had several parents that I knew that worked for the schools that said, hey, practice with me. So I said, okay. So we started practicing. My school right now is in Cherryville, Kansas, which is a pretty remote area. So we're struggling with internet connection down there and getting a lot of buffering as we go through life. So we're trying to make sure that we are on the same page with what we need and if something happens. So I've contacted my family. They have a laptop computer that we're going to be working with. They downloaded Zoom. We talked about getting an external camera so that if they need to show me other things in the room, they can, instead of having the computer, which has to be turned around. These are all options that you can check into through your district or through your agency to see if you need that. I do have an external camera, and I do enjoy using it, especially if I have a document that I want to show that I don't want to go through the trouble of scanning in. So for right now, I'm going to show you what that looks like just by going to my video and changing that up a little bit. So I have to stop the share on this screen to show you my external camera. Okay, it's not working when I'm in the Zoom. So you go down to your stop video button, and if you click on that, it will take you to a 2-point view. And then I guess when you're not in Zoom, you can use that other camera. It's not letting me use it now that I'm in Zoom. Sorry about that. Let me go back to share the screen with you guys on the handout. Once my families and I are on the same page and we're all getting the same equipment, I need to make sure I contact them and let them know what's going to happen in case the internet fails or in case I get a power outage, which has happened quite a bit. Even in Johnston County, we had a car wreck one time and hit a light pole and it knocked the power out. And my parent, I needed to speak immediately. So we use cell phone and we text. That's our primary form. If your family doesn't have that, you might have to have a landline, or your family may say, go ahead and email me. And then what if we lose connection? Should we go ahead and just stop the session? Sometimes we'll get buffering and sitting and spinning. Sometimes if I end that one meeting and open up another meeting, that will solve that problem. So kind of keep that in the back of your head. Sometimes the pause button gets hit and you have to let them know that you're paused right now, I can't see you. Sometimes the audio can be too loud or not loud enough, so you need to adjust that. And getting kicked off by the internet is a common thing that happens, especially with so many people logging on now. I'm seeing more and more issues with internet connection, especially in my remote areas. So make sure you talk with your family members and determine what that alternate form of communication is going to be for you guys. I tell the family exactly what's going to happen. So if we lose connection within the first 30 minutes of my session, I'm going to send you a new email with a different link to a new meeting. Go ahead and log into that. I'll send you a text and I'll ask you about your system. If they're not hearing me, but I'm hearing them, they're to send me a text. So it can happen both ways. So you just need to be aware of that, so that if something happens, how are you going to communicate with the person on the other end? And usually text is the way we do it. I do get email addresses and cell phone numbers. I've had people ask me, do you go ahead and just put your client or your student in on your calendar, and then that sends the link, and then the parent just clicks on their calendar? My parents are not quite as savvy that way, and they prefer that I send them a text and remind them of the meeting, and then send them an email of the link directly. And I'm trying to be careful about how many links I send out, because I have to end one meeting before I start another, because you don't want to have an overlap of meetings. So you want to make sure you actually have a new link for a new meeting, so that the person that logged off of your old meeting doesn't log in back in and see you with another file. So make sure that you start that each time. I do use the chat function sometimes, but to be honest with you, I don't use it all that frequently when I'm dealing with a parent. But all of this information occurs prior to my first session. And then how would the session links be planned and sent? I just talked to you a little bit about that and how I do it. Some people do use the calendar. My families are not quite that savvy. This may or may not be a new technology for you or your families. The professional way in which you plan for potential problems is very reassuring to parents. So I want to emphasize, don't forget to go through that step with parents, because they may have that question in their mind, but not be able to verbalize it for you. I do comprehension checks with my parents quite a bit. I ask them to repeat back to me what they've just heard. I also say things like, I just want to make sure that I covered everything that I needed to cover. Could you tell me what it is that you heard? Then I make sure I reinforce the parent's comprehension by validating their response. And I just say simple things like, that's perfect, thank you. Sometimes once they repeat it back, we forget to validate that that's what we wanted to hear. So don't forget to continually validate them. This is very new for them as well. And some of them are excited about this, and some of them are not so excited. So I've had issues with other people being in the room and I can't see them. So when we go into a home and we're doing a home visit, we can kind of see or hear if somebody else is in the room. When we're doing Zoom, we don't have that luxury. So you'll get the feeling that somebody else is in the room just for the way the child is looking, or you've heard noises or something else. So sometimes I'll just come right out and ask, is there somebody else in the room today? And if there is, I always make sure to introduce myself so that they realize that I can hear them. I'm a real person on this other end. I'm not just a virtual computer person. And that also kind of eases some of the tension that might be going on. Sometimes grandparents are like, this isn't going to work. Why are you doing this? Or an aunt or an uncle or somebody else that's in the family. So they want to watch it to see how it works. And I welcome that, so long as it's okay with the family member, with the parents. But then I want to make sure that they realize, you know, that this is a professional session. If you have any questions for me, please wait till the end and I'll be glad to answer any questions you might have, just to try to minimize interruptions, because they'll get a question and they'll want to ask me right away, and that can cause a problem for me. I talk to them again in advance about how the session is going to look. I ask the family to confirm what their learning style is and how they want information presented. Once you're into Zoom, and those of you who are doing it now have this plethora of information on your computer, on your laptop, and it's all kinds of handouts and our tick cards and language stuff, and it's just, I organize books. It's organized kind of differently. So I always want to ask family members, how do they want information presented, and what is their learning style? Once I know what their learning style is, then that's going to jog my memory of, oh, I've got a handout on this I can send you later. If the family member says, no, I just want you to show me, fine, I just go ahead and pull stuff up and show them. I also want the family member to realize that if somebody else is in their home watching this, sometimes a neighbor will, oh, let me see, I want to see what they're doing. And they just kind of pop in. Sometimes the children may not be aware of their diagnosis. So you want to make sure that the family member knows that what information do you want them to share or during a session or not want them to mention during a session. Some families don't disclose what the medical issues are going on with their children and they don't want to mention. Other families are totally open to that. But it's something that once you start Zooming, you might want to revisit with the family because they may forget about it, not realize it. Because when you have this screen between you, this computer between you, you forget some of that. Does that make sense to people? Nodding? Yes? And then I also talk a lot about how I'm going to share information with them with progress notes or activity notes and additional handouts, and that's usually by email. My families that don't have email, I do ask them if they want me to mail them a hard copy, and the vast majority of them say no. But I do make it an option just so that they know I've offered, okay? This next professional information, I don't want to discount. I want to really stress it. You have to dress professionally. You're still being seen from the chest up. There was a time when I had the cat vomit in my shoe and I couldn't wear shoes one day because they were in the washer, but nobody can see my shoes, right? But they can see this part and that. So be careful to make sure you dress. Ladies, I wear a lot of scarves and I does try to hide the old lady skin that's on my neck. So I do have different scarves that I might pull out and wrap around me very quickly. So be careful how you bend and how you move on the computer screen. If you go to stand up and you bend over, you can lean your chest right into the camera, which may not be appropriate for dad on the other side to see. So if you've got grandpa there or dad, just be careful how you move on the screen. It makes a difference. My printer is up above my computer. So when I go to print stuff off, I'll stand up to kind of scan it back in. I have to be careful of that. Also careful about my arms and my sleeves because at times you can see right through the camera, right down my sleeve and right into something that you may not also want to be showing to other people. So just keep that in mind. It's something that you don't think about when you're into the moment of Zoom, but once it happens to you, you're like, oh my gosh, I should have realized that. You know, I bend over with my chest into the camera. Show. I also tried to move my picture to the center of the camera. And this was a para that I had that reminded me of doing that because once you're into the Zoom and you're minimizing your screen because you're pulling up other activities to share or to do, you might minimize your screen and move the picture off to the side. And then you're talking off here to the side and the parent may not realize that you're still engaged with them. So I try to keep that picture right there in the middle of the screen so that parents know that I am talking to them. I'm very, very careful about silencing my cell phone and putting it aside so that the parents don't think that I'm doing something else. I want them to realize that my time with them is my time with them and I'm not multitasking. I'm not sending a text to somebody else. I'm not looking at somebody else's email. I'm working strictly with them. If for some reason I need to keep my cell phone out because I have somebody who's sick or I'm expecting a call from the doctor or whatever, I'll tell my family that. And then if that happens, I'll have to mute my computer so I can go ahead and go in to check that call. Make sure you mute when you talk about something that you don't want somebody else to hear. But the time of the session belongs to my family, and I want them to feel that connection. So they can't always see everything I'm doing, so I'm going to communicate with them. I'm making a note of that right now so that I can send that to you, so they don't think that I'm just blowing them off. Professional language. The computer is different than in person in that we can't see body language. We can't see people, objects, or animals that are outside of our screen. We can't see something that might be distracting the family member, and it's hard for me to tell body language. So it's hard for me to interpret how that family member has received my message. So you might need to ask for clarification, and I do that quite a bit. If I see parent, stand up a little bit, if I see a head tilt, if I see shoulders go down because they're feeling overwhelmed, I might say, talk to me a little bit about what you're thinking right now. So I'll give them some vague, open-ended question to give them a chance to tell me either something that I've said or something that I modeled that they didn't understand that they can ask for clarification on. I'm always, a lot of times, asking for that clarification. I'll say things like, you seem hesitant with that instruction. Talk to me more about it. I'm sorry, I can't tell if you understood that part or not. Can we go over it again? That type of information. Sarcasm. We've all had this quite a bit, but remember, no sarcasm is a good rule. Sarcasm is extremely hard for families to interpret over the internet, and with possible cutouts, it's best just not to use it. On the same note, if you're not understanding something that they're saying, because they still may be using sarcasm, ask for clarification. I'll say things like, it looks as though somebody or something's behind the door. Am I imagining that? To see, if I am imagining that. And sometimes it's an animal, and sometimes it's, oh no, that's baby brother, that's baby sister, there's something else going on in the room. So ask. Don't, it's not unprofessional to ask them a question about what's going on in their home, especially if it's something that's interfering with your session. And then this is our new normal right now, and we don't know for certain how long this new normal is going to last. So I really encourage that there be no negative talk. Be positive. The parents are a bit overwhelmed. Some of them are now taking on the teaching role and are not liking it, not one little bit. And they're taking on the daycare center role and they're not liking that either. And they're not liking both roles. And now we're saying, okay, here comes therapy, coming in after that. So make sure that you're as positive as you can be. And if you see a person being overwhelmed, it's easy to back it off. Feel free to back off, in fact. I say things to them like, I know this is new for both of us, but together we're going to become experts. Please bear with me as I try to figure out this new technology. And then when things work, try to notice that. Gosh, I really noticed that you looked at Jimmy when he called your name. Sometimes it's something that simple and that easy that's enough to validate a parent of, oh yeah, I did. I did look at my son when they called my name. And I said, yeah, that's really great. Give that eye contact. If you're negative, your families will be as well. So families want somebody to work with their child who is positive, so stay positive even if they're negative. A lot of questions that I get deal with the evidence behind teletherapy and telepractice, and there needs to be more. I'm not going to say that there doesn't, but I wanted to kind of give you guys some information that came from the ASHA website directly. And it did look at 40 different efficacy studies, and basically face-to-face visits versus teletherapy and outcomes, they were the same. So the outcomes of a child receiving teletherapy versus the outcomes of a child receiving face-to-face were basically the same. So they saw no difference between teletherapy and in face-to-face visits. And this was primarily for the elementary school and above. So there's been some new research on the birth to 3 population. And what they're noticing in that population is that they're seeing an increase in parent confidence and competency. So the parent feels more confident, and when asked, why do you think that is? It was because, well, the therapist isn't here. So I can't just leave the room to go answer the phone or leave the room to go change Joey's diaper. I actually have to stay in the room and stay engaged with my child, or the child takes off. And a lot of families will tell me that there was a learning curve when we first started this, and that we didn't realize when Joey ran off the screen that we had to go get Joey and go bring him. So how do you plan for that to happen so that it doesn't interfere with the session? So again, we're going to get into some of that, how I set up my session and what that looks like. But just realize that there's a significant amount of evidence coming out on teletherapy and that it works. And it's right now, it's not an option to do face-to-face. So this is great that we still get to see our children, and we can do it online, and there's evidence to support what it is. So I've listed those resources for you. There still needs to be more studies. Sometimes I feel like this is a big one, in that the obstacle is public perception of the role of the speech therapist or speech language pathologist. A lot of people think we only work on individuals who stutter or artic issues, and I think we need to explain that actually the vast majority of what we do is with language, and the telepractice platform can only help us more in that area. Then I love putting this in here that the times they are changing, because the public is slowly embracing the transition from in-person services for more activities of daily life and shopping and banking. And therefore, I think it's also going to change when we start seeing more telepractice as well. When I look at my families that have embraced telepractice, they really like it. They enjoy it because if I have a child that's having an issue with feeding, I say, well, what time do you eat? And they say, well, we usually eat at 5 o'clock. And so instead of having to create an eating time, I can actually set up a session at 5 o'clock, and they can set me up and I can watch in Zoom to see what's going on during that time. Same way with diapering, same way with nighttime routine. Whatever it is that you have an agreement with your agency on being able to do, you can Zoom during that time. And you're in the luxury of your own home, so you're not going out at night, which in Johnston County right now, we're shelter in place kind of area, so we can't go out anyway. But that is an option for you to do that. It does reply with all of the national, state, and institutional guidelines. So there's no inherent limits to telepractice. So then I wanted to jump into what my first session is, unless Monica, you had any interruptions going on. Okay. I take my 60-minute session. when I'm doing a home visit, and I divide it up into sections. My first 0 to 5 minute session is the welcome part. So I just kind of get online and I do my greeting with my family member. I review any parent data that they've taken. I try to be a really good active listener without taking over the lead. One of the things that telepractice can do for you is it can allow a lot more sharing with the parent. So having that quiet time to give the parent time to think so that they can come back and talk and be a part of things, so that you're a 50% partner and not a 80-20% partner. If the parent struggled, I want to acknowledge their efforts, and I want to keep notes of what needs they might have, so what support I can provide additionally. All this happens in the first 0 to 5 minutes. Then I worked in advance with the parent on what they were supposed to work on that week. So my next transition is into that activity that they were supposed to work on that week. So I will ask them flat out, did you have a chance to work on your activity this last week? Some of them will say, yes, let me show you what happened. Some of them will say, no, I didn't have a chance to look at them. Some of them will say, what activity? You're going to get the same kind of parent doing telepractice that you get during face-to-face. It's not going to change. You're going to have those parents that are all on board, that are doing everything you ask, that are 100% into it, that go above and beyond. And you're going to get the parents that sit back, that just have the mental health capacity to not engage. They cannot be a part of things, but they don't want to not accept the service. So those are going to be a little harder to engage as they are in face-to-face. So just keep that in the back of your head. Telepractice doesn't make everyone be a wonderful engager. You still have those differences that continue. Then my next 5 to 10 minutes is going to be a warm-up activity. My parents get used to this, where they'll, after I've set this schedule up and I've talked to them in advance about what the schedule is going to look like, so I ask them to bring those together for us. So if the parent says, yeah, I want to play with Play-Doh, Joey really likes Play-Doh, I ask them to make sure they have all that ready for them when I log in, so that we don't spend our time with them running around trying to get all the supplies. They've got it together. And it's a learning curve for them like it is for us. So sometimes when we've set up something in advance, then I log in and I say, do you have that? They say, oh no, let me go get it. The more they say that, then the less you'll see that over time, because then they'll start realizing, oh, she's going to log on, that she remembers what it is I have. I need to have that together. Sometimes I'll send that in the text with the link. Don't forget, we're going to be working on feeding, today. Don't forget, we're going to be working on changing clothes today. I'll just send that in the link so that they can have a remembrance. I do try to give constructive criticism to reinforce that what they're currently doing is supporting the need. I do try to tie my routines back to the goals on the IFSP or IEP, but I try to let this go uninterrupted for 5 minutes. So the parent's working with the child and I'm taking notes and I'm watching what they're doing and I'm listening to their language. And I'm listening to the relationship with that child. Then after that's over with, I have my reflection time like I do after all of my sessions or activities. And then I ask them to reflect on whether or not they feel like they're meeting their goals. And they can be a lot more, I guess, they can critique themselves a lot more than I would. So I find it interesting once I ask them to do that. So what do you think happened here? And what do you think you need to work on? And how can I support that? That's the kind of verbiage that I use. Then the next 5 to 10 minutes is the setup for the next set of activities. So using time management, I'm always watching my clock to see how much time I have left in the session. And that will tell me how many different activities I can do that day. Those of you who know me with the ESDM and the PESDM, I'm looking at alternating my activities between the sensory social time, which might be singing songs, playing with bubbles, doing Play-Doh, a snack time, and with an object play, which might be shape sorter, puzzles, books. So I want to make sure that I don't do object, or sensory social back to back. I want to make sure that they alternate, because we see a different kid depending upon the different activities, okay? Typically, I have 3 to 4 activities during my hour session. Each of the activities lasts 5 to 10 minutes. Some of them are longer depending upon if they're desirable by the child, some of them not so much. If we see we're getting to an end, I will ask the parent, do you think this is a good stopping point? If they say yes, they try to give the child something to play with while we reflect. And then during that self-reflection time, that's when we note how we're doing during the session. Then we'll go ahead and we'll introduce the next activity. Some of you are familiar with jars, and some of you are not so familiar with jars. The placement of the camera is real important when you're doing your activities, and I did note that again here on number 3. If a parent has a hard time moving the camera that's built into their computer, that's how this external camera can be helpful. So keep that in mind. You can use the external camera to have the parent angle things around the room so you get a better view of what's actually happening. Because I might say, gosh, I can't see Joey doing the puzzle. Can you move the camera down so I can see him doing it? That type of thing. So a joint activity routine, or a JAR, has 4 parts to it. The first part is, what are you going to play with? And hopefully you've done some pre-planning and you have an idea of what you want to do, what you want to play with. Sometimes with the younger children, we will put several activities out and let them crawl for what it is they want and let them choose that activity. Sometimes we'll choose the activity for them. You have that option. You can do whatever it is you want, or however you have your sessions set up. Once the activities are out and the child's chosen one, you're going to remove the other activities from the field so the focus can be on the one that they first went to. So the first part of a JAR is, what are you going to play with? The second part of the JAR is, what are you going to teach? And so if you've got a goal of eye contact, if you've got a goal of requesting, if you've got a goal of signing, if you've got a goal of using the pincer grasp, whatever your goal is, you want to make sure, how can you meet that goal during that activity? How can you teach it? And what you're going to be doing is teaching your parent. So how can you coach the parent to meet that goal? The next part of the JAR is, how can you change up the activity? So one of the things you want to think about is, let's say that you're doing shape sorter and you've been working on, can the child actually rotate the shape and get it in? That's what you're targeting, your goal. Once the child starts doing that, well, then how can you mix it up? Can you make it so that the shape sorter gets moved around so the child has to re-angle themselves to do it? Can you purposefully try to put one in that's different? Can you turn it into a turn-taking exchange where you've got a shape and the child has a shape and you each try to put it in? Can you try to block where the child's trying to go in and look for some kind of negative response? Any way that you can change up that activity, that's the change up we're looking for. And then the fourth part of the JAR is ending the activity and closing it and cleaning it up. So in your houses that may not be as organized as some, this may be a little bit more challenging because there's going to be a lot of clutter out there. So keep that in the back of your head. How can you clean up where you're working with the child or the family is at this moment so that they're not distracted by all these other items that are out there on the carpet, okay? So the 4 parts to a JAR: what are you going to play with? What are you going to teach? Goes back to your IFSP goal. How can you change up the activity? And then close it. And all of these JARs should take anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes, depending upon whether it was a desirable or an undesirable. And you'll get a feel for when the activity has gone about as far as it can go. And then if it lasts 2 or 3 minutes, you're going to close it out and move to another one. After each activity, I have 5 to 10 minutes of reflection where I'm asking the parent how they think things went, if they met the goal they were looking at. We talk right up front about what the JAR is. Okay, I see you picked a puzzle. Okay, I see you picked that they want to be able to make animal sounds as they put the animal into each of the puzzle spaces. Oh, we're going to change it up by having the animals talk to themselves, and you're going to take turns. And then when we feel like this has met an end, we're going to go ahead and close it. Okay? Makes sense? Getting some nods? After I've taught the parent the different parts of the JAR and I transition to the next activity, this is a pretty steep learning curve for a lot of my parents, and it usually takes, I want to say, 3 sessions at least before they start getting the hang of it. So make sure that if you're using this framework, that you use the same terminology over and over again so that they can start to get a feel for it. And I will ask my family, so what JARs did you pick for today instead of activities? So remember what a JAR is. It's got those 4 parts. It's got the, what are you going to play with? What are we going to teach? How are we going to change it? And how can we close it? So time management is important because I want to end one session, make sure I get my notes and my billing done before I have to log into my next session. I'm going to constantly looking here at this time management piece. The next part will be the closing and the recap of what we worked on today. And I'm going to tell them I took data during the session. Here's what I saw and what I noticed. Would you agree with that? Because that data is going to go into either the portal for Medicaid or on my progress note. So I want to make sure that I'm using that when I'm planning for the future. And if I've got the child meeting that goal, then I'm going to be needing to make another goal for that kid, for that child. And then I'm asking them, what are you going to practice over the next week? Tell me what that's going to look like for you. And then I say, as we set that plan, when I go ahead and start up our next session, what is it that you want to work on? So that I can send that to them in a text and they can have the things that they need. I'm always self-evaluating what I'm doing. Sometimes I will record myself on Zoom, and if I do, I'm able to kind of look back and observe me later. Make sure you let the parent know if you're doing that. Sometimes parents want to see themselves and they record themselves as well because they want to view it back or they want daddy to see it later or grandma to see it later. So think about that. And then on the self-evaluation, how can I be better? And I know a lot of us have had ourselves videotaped a lot. So that's one thing that we're always looking at is how can we make ourselves go to the next level professionally and support the parent in that process. So I'm always asking myself this question, and we talk a lot about this. Is the parent goal for today teaching them a strategy to use with their child or teaching them a skill to teach the child? It will help you lead to what handouts you need. Many of you are Hannon certified, and Hannon just went to online with all of their resources during this whole COVID-19 episode. So that's something to keep in mind, that you can share those handouts with your family members right away, which will be awesome. You won't have to worry about printing them out or scanning them out an option. So keeping that in mind. And I believe I left a little parent information form here. If I'm first starting teletherapy, here are the questions that I kind of ask myself real quickly. What's their name? What's the parent name? What are the siblings in the home? Who are the other people in the home, especially pets' names? And then most sessions are going to occur with who. Sometimes when you log on, all of a sudden dad is there. Mom took Joey to the hospital. He's got an ear infection. Or grandma's staying with us now, and I have to be upstairs with Jimmy, who's sick. So grandma's going to be with the session. Sometimes I will ask them if we had something specific planned, if it's okay if grandma goes with Joey and we do what we had planned. Is there a problem with that? And if they say, yes, I really need to be doing this, then I just say, okay, and I have to change everything I'm doing to go with the grandma. So keeping that in mind as well. And then exchanging your phone numbers and your email addresses so you have that at contact information. So that was the real down and dirty, really fast teletherapy for birth to 3, which is going to look very different than it would for the older kids, where I'm providing direct services. Questions?
Kathy, this is Monica. There's been a few questions that have come up, and I've just been answering them on the chat because they didn't have a lot to do with therapy. They were more kind of technical questions. But I might ask, if you don't mind, maybe pulling up kind of the session again and maybe spending a little bit more time kind of walking through that activity, then reflection with the parent, and then the activity, just because I feel like what I'm hearing from my staff is it's not just the parent and the child now that everybody's home, it's all of the kids if there are school kids involved. And then my own staff are really sweet and honest, and they're saying, you know, my own kids are crawling on my back while I'm trying to coach a family during a session because everybody's home. So again, I know this is an unideal situation for everybody, but could you walk us through maybe navigating some of those types of things? And then if you guys have questions too, type them in the chat box and we can spend some time going over your individual questions.
I've had issues with a lot of distraction in the background when I'm trying to do Zoom. If you have headphones, and if you have a headphone with a mic, that can also help take away some of the background noise that might be happening at your house, and also help you hear the parent better if the parent also has headphones and a mic. If not, you're going to have that open-ended mic, so you're going to be getting a lot of that clutter. I struggle with figure ground issues. So if there's a lot of noise going on with that household, I'm going to tell the parent that. I hear the TV going in the background, and all I can hear is the TV. Can we turn the TV off during this time, or can we turn it down? I hear Joey playing their video game, and the noises are coming across, and I notice that Jimmy is turning to look every time it goes on. Can we put them in another room right now? Is that possible? So I try to minimize that just by being open and honest with my family members. I struggle with figure ground issues, and I'm hearing a lot of distraction in the background, and I'm having a hard time listening to what Jimmy is saying. Another part, when I'm dealing with the Artic kids, and they have a P for F, I might be asking the mom, are they biting their lip and blowing when they make that F sound? And then I'm teaching the mom on what that looks like. And then I try to have the camera get real close to the child's face so I can see, are they actually making an F sound? If they interdentalize stuff, and I've been trying to target that, I might be looking at that. Does their tongue stick between their teeth when they say that? Would you mind looking at their mouth and letting me know? So the parent becomes my para, and then I coach the parent on how to fix those changes. When I have a child who's fronting quite a bit and I'm trying to get that velar kicked in, I do have the parent use the back of a spoon to hold the tongue tip down so that I can get that K sound better in, and I'm talking the parent through. I'm always telling a parent that nothing that we do during therapy that I coach you with should ever hurt a child. So if you don't feel comfortable doing something, let me know and we'll try another plan. So I let them know up front to give them an out if they want one. So keeping that in mind, the sessions that I gave you here, or the information that I gave you here, was really set up for my language delayed kids and my children with global developmental delays, because they're the ones that I probably spend the most planning time on, for those children. So I like this framework because it allows me to put some of that planning time off on the parent. So I'm not worried about creating board maker pictures or creating something else. We've got a schedule in place here that allows for learning to occur without me having to do a lot of pre-planning, which when you've got giant caseloads, you just don't have time for that. So my first session, or the first few minutes of my session, which is 0 to 5, is that welcome, where I'm greeting the parent. I'm asking the parent to summarize the progress for the week. What challenges did they have? I review their data. Some of my parents are really good at taking data, and kind of is spooky because the kid's also going maybe to an ABA clinic on the side, and so they're bringing in those ABA forms. So whatever it is that the data that they have, I want them to know that I appreciate them getting it, and I will look at it. I try to be an active listener without talking or taking over the lead. I want to make sure that the parent feels like we are a mutual partner in this. So many times I will give a little bit more wait time for my family members who at first aren't sure of their role in teletherapy. So I will say, this is a 50-50 deal. You know, I need you to tell me what's going on. And then I just wait. I acknowledge their efforts. I do keep notes over what the parent might need with additional support in. And then I try to get them ready to transition into the activity for the day, which is the last part of this little welcome part. The parent usually will do a warm-up activity, which is showing me what they worked on last week. And many parents want to do that during the welcome. And sometimes we'll go right from the welcome into the warm-up, and there's a smooth transition. Sometimes I have to ask the parent, well, show me what you did last week. You know, give me a little example of that. You guys were working on the puzzle. Bring out the puzzle and show me. And then they'll go ahead and bring it out and show me. So I got that little warm-up going. Then after the warm-up activity, I want to make sure I give time for reflection. Some parents use this time as time to deflect instead of reflect. And so I'm always cautious about that as well. If they're trying to talk themselves into not having to do another activity, I'll say, well, let's wind this up, and I'll try to kind of keep us on track and move us on. I do try to give constructive criticism, and I do try to note the positive things that I've seen within the activity. Then the setup for today's activity, and again, I like to rotate between sensory social games like songs, bubbles, Play-Doh, snack time, and object play, which would be maybe play with a ball, maybe puzzles, shape sorter, baby doll play. I'll look at that very differently. I don't want to have all of my play be object play because some children gravitate towards one or the other. So if I've got a child that only wants a sensory social, I'm going to make sure I have other things involved so the kid doesn't have to just do that. I want to make sure I include objects in the play. If I have a child that's just stemming on objects, then I'm going to have to really be watching how much object play I have involved and how can I tweak that so that we have more functional play going on with the objects and not just. And then we introduce the new activity for the day, and we however many of those I can work in. Like I said, typically I can do 3 within an hour session. If you're school-based and you're being told 30 minutes max is what we're having for the children for kindergarten and under, then you're going to be altering what that looks like. Then maybe you only have time for 1 activity for the day. And again, that's just going to depend upon what your process is. I think with my process, because I've with elementary school as well as the preschoolers, the state guidelines have come up saying no more than 30 minutes a day on the children on iPads for the younger ones. And they said that that's a guideline and not a hard and fast rule. So if I have a child that's been getting some pretty significant help with their tick and the mother's there on board to help, not all the time is spent with the child on the screen. Some of that time is spent with me coaching the parent and talking with the parent. So keep that in the back of your head as well.
Kathy,
And then,
I might pause you for a second. We had a question from Meredith Woodring, who wanted to know, she's asking if the mom should be holding the camera facing the child, or should Meredith be able to see both the child and the parent interact?
They should see both, because you're coaching the parent to work with the child. So the camera should be on both. You might need the camera to go back to the child when you're looking at those artic sounds and how the child's producing them, but then you should immediately have it pull back out so that you're seeing both. Because your job is to coach the parent, and you got to see the parent interact.
Perfect. We've got another question from Mary Ellen McGeehan, who asks, can you offer some examples of the types of questions that you might ask to get the parent to reflect on what they've practiced and what their awareness was from the activity?
Sometimes, Mary Ellen, I'll go back to those primary coaching reflective questions, and I use those quite a bit, and that's in the primary coaching, handbook. But to be honest with you, there are those parents that will immediately just start telling you everything they know, and you're not going to have to pull things from them. And then there'll be other parents that you do have to pull more information from them. And sometimes I'll just say, it looks like you've had a hard time with this activity, if I feel like they haven't practiced it. And then I'll say, would you like to repeat that activity again today? Sometimes parents need to do an activity more than one time, 3 or 4 or 5 times to understand what's going on. So if the goal was that the child be able to sign for more, and they're not able to show me that during the warm-up activity, I might be asking the parents, so when you were having them sign for more, how did you model that? Or when you were having them sign more, did you put them through more? What did you do? How did you get the child to sign more for you? And then that can also kind of open that up with, well, I didn't put them through it. I didn't touch their hands, but maybe I should have, kind of response. Does that make sense, Mary Ellen? I can't see you.
Yeah, she was also asking, how you can get them to reflect in a way that allows the parent to come up with the alternatives.
Yes, and Kathy, your answer did make sense to me. I think just for the newer folks that are getting started with coaching, this teletherapy with more concretes, like you just explained, is very helpful. So thank you.
You bet. It's not a brand new forum. It's been around for a long time. The ASHA website has quite a few trainings on it. I went to the one that was on the Birth to 3, that was just teletherapy was a part of the whole Birth to 3 symposium that they had. And the speech path there had been doing it in Colorado for 10 years. So she'd been doing primary coaching teletherapy for 10 years to remote areas. So a lot of people have done this for a long time, and there's an awful lot of evidence to support doing it. I think it's just a matter of once you start doing it, you're going to maybe have more questions. And then if so, how can we support you once you start doing it?
We've got another question from one of our non-SLPs. So we've got some OTs, PTs, social workers, ECSEs, and they're really asking, what might this look like during mealtime, diapering, kind of some of those more routine activities versus just object play with the child.
When I've gone into the routines, it's actually been easier. I find routines a lot easier because your jar is already set for you. You know what you're working on. You're going to be changing a diaper. You know what you want to set as your goal. You hope that the kid will hold still while they change the diaper. And you know what you're going to change up, maybe by having some toys for them to play with during the changing. And then, of course, when the diaper's changed, then the routine's over with. The hard part during those routines is the positioning of the computer so that you can see what's actually happening. So if the changing table is on the floor, that's no problem. You can set the laptop down on the floor. But some of the changing tables have been trickier for me to be able to see what the child's doing, what the parent is doing. So then, somebody else will be holding the computer, showing the which can be awkward. So just being able to problem solve through that. Dinner time has not been that hard because usually there's a table or a counter or something, unless you have people that are grazing, and then dinner time can be harder. But if you've got some place to set the computer, you're looking a little bit better. So those are the problems that I've had, not so much the routine itself, but how do I get the camera position so I can actually see what's happening during the routine? I hope that makes sense. Then the reflection time, if you're having meal time, I might interrupt and I might say, hey, Mom, could I speak to you for just a minute? So that she can go ahead and pull away from the meal. And then I might say, hey, I noticed that, Joey's got Cheerios spread all over the table and that he's picking them up by raking. Maybe if you could go ahead and just give him one Cheerio at a time, we'll see if we can't get more of a pincer grasp, if that's one of my goals. Or I noticed that one of our goals is that he'll use a spoon, but we don't have anything on the table that he can use a spoon with today. Do you have some yogurt or some applesauce or something that you can pull from the refrigerator so I can see how he's using the spoon? So a lot of the goals direct how I'm going to interact with the family member. And then when I see what's happening, how can I implement that goal during that routine? And then I'll just stop and call the parent to the side and they'll come over and there we go. Does that make sense? Did that answer that question?
Yeah, I think that was a good one. We had a question from Alicia on asking if you can expand on how you're using the secondary camera, and do parents need a secondary camera as well? And Alicia is specifically thinking about kids that she might be using augmentative communication or repetitive line books. And is there a way to link your iPad to your computer? So more kind of assistive technology questions.
Yes, there is a way to link your iPad to your computer. Greenbush has helped me do that. I have not used that option a lot because I haven't needed to, but there is a way to share screen. And so if you go into YouTube, there's all kinds of videos with YouTube and Zoom on how to actually do that. So if you've got stuff on your iPad that you're wanting to share on the screen, you can do that. I have used my external camera to show on my iPad so that I haven't had to link it up, because it's easier for me to get in and out of the external camera with the Zoom camera than it would be to in and out of the screens. Am I making sense? If I'm screen sharing an iPad, it's easier for me to use my external camera versus screen share. Am I making sense to anybody? Some people glazed over.
Yeah. And
yeah,
I think Alicia just jumped on to talk. Is that right, Alicia?
Yes. I was so kind of the same way. If you were having a parent read to you or having a parent read to their child and you're coaching them on that reading, or if you were going to try to share a book, you would use that external camera is what you're stating, rather than scanning the pages in and sharing your screen each time.
Yes.
Okay.
That's how I use the external camera.
Okay.
Plus, sometimes I just have silly little questions come from the kids on, like, what's behind you? And I say, oh, that's my plant. Oh, really? Well, what's out that window? So sometimes people just want to know what's in your house, just like we're wondering what's in their house. So I use my external camera to show them.
Okay. Yeah, I read somewhere where people were suggesting even letting the kids take you on a little tour of their house. So yeah, that makes sense. Thanks.
And introducing you to all the members that are there. And then writing down their names, because they're all going to expect you to remember their names, which is why I had that little cheat sheet that I'll pull out, especially the animal names. Oh, you remember my dog? What's his name? Your dog's name. Tell me, please.
Sure. Thanks.
Kathy, we had another question from an ECSE, Judy, who asks, how are the new activities chosen in a session? And if the parent isn't offering those options of what the child engages or shows interest in, do you then make suggestions or have examples to start that brainstorming, since the camera view might be limited?
That's a really good question. I will do that usually during my first session. So a lot of times I will ask the family members, gosh, show me what you got going on in your house. What toys do you guys like to play with? What toys is Jimmy drawn to? Show me where does Jimmy usually play? Show me what that looks like. And then I'm taking a mental note as they're showing me everything, whether things are up on a shelf, whether things are in boxes, whether things are just scattered all over the floor, and what that looks like. Sometimes with those toys that are scattered on the floor, they're just parts of toys. They're not fully there. So it's hard for me to say, let's do the shape sorter when maybe there's no shapes to go with the shape sorter. So I'll kind of create that list myself and then sit down with the family member and we'll discuss what that list could be. For those families that don't have as many options toy-wise as other families, we can go back to the whole kitchen thing with the pots and pans and spoons and banging and stacking cans and using what's in the natural environment. We can most certainly do that, and taking the pillows off the sofa and having the sofa turn into the trampoline. You can go to all of those other options. So if I have a family member that says, or that seems embarrassed to tell me they don't have a lot of toys, I will start making other options available to them. Well, I noticed that you have a sofa. Would you have a problem with taking the cushions off and letting Joey jump on the springs? Oh, I noticed that you've got a lot of cans here in the kitchen. Would you have a problem with us using those to build a tower? I'm always asking permission from my family members because I want to be culturally sensitive, and what may be appropriate in one household may not be appropriate in another. If I see something occurring that I feel like may not be appropriate, I'll ask the family member, is that appropriate for, do you feel like this is appropriate? Is this typically what you have in your house? Sometimes it's a child naked running through the camera. Sometimes it's another child beating up another child in the background. And that's when I want to make sure that the family member has permission to stop our session if they need to go and fix something that's going on that should.
Perfect. Thank you for addressing that one, Kathy. We had a question from an OT named Brandy, who asks, how are you documenting your visit as you go through the visit? Are you doing it during the visit, or do you do your documentation after the visit?
For those of you who know me, I'm a little bit anal on this, in that I need to have a plan going into the visit. So I've got a planning sheet going into the visit, and I'm making my notes on that planning sheet. So I have my IFSP goals that are there, my IEP goals, and what I'm addressing, and then I'm actually doing pluses and zeros. Did they do it? Did they not do it? And how many times did I get? Then I figure that up real quickly, put my percentage, and then I'm logging into the Medicaid portal, and I'm putting that information into the Medicaid portal, as well as keeping that progress note or activity note, whatever it is for that day, for the progress note at the end of the quarter, so that I can make sure I update the IFSP or IEP at that time. So I do a lot of that. I've always been afraid that I'm not going to have documentation if ever I need it. And I've been doing this for over 30 years, and I've never really needed it. so maybe I'm doing more than what is, I should be doing, but I've been real careful about that. I've had several friends who've been called into due process, and when I asked them if you could do anything differently after your due process, what would you have done? And they said, I wish I would have written more discrete goals, and I wish I would have had better data. So that kind of hit home with me. So does that make sense? Brandy?
Yes, thank you, Kathy. Sorry,
Hi, Brandy.
I had to unmute myself. I have a barking dog.
That's okay.
Thanks.
I've got a scratching cat, so.
Kathy, we had a question from an SLP named Stephanie, who it didn't appear in the chat box, but she was wondering, is there any direct modeling with the child during the session, or are you only coaching and reflecting with the parents after the parents interact with the child?
That's a really good question. Yes, I do direct modeling, and usually it's with sound system acquisition. Or I'm trying to implement a certain strategy that I've asked the parent to do and the parent's struggling with. So I might go ahead and see if I can get the child to engage me on the screen. Most of the children will. That's not an issue. The younger they are, the less that typically happens. And the more delayed they are, the less that happens. So you might run into some problems in being able to actually, or not actually, lay hands on a child to model. But if I can pull a child back and I'm trying to get them to model help, and they're modeling it this way because they don't have supination yet, and I might say, can we use another sign for help? And so the mother will say, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, can't we just use the fist for help? Can they just say this? Because I don't want them clapping for help. That always bothers me, because I can't tell, are you clapping or are you signing for help? So I'll do that kind of modeling for them. Does that make sense? But I model a lot.
Thank you, that helps.
Okay.
That so far is the last question that has popped up so far. We're real close to 4. One of the things that had come up, Kathy, as you were talking, is people had asked if we were going to have copies of your outline, and I said that we would, along with the notes that Amy has been taking. And
Thank you, Amy.
Yeah, thank you. She didn't know what she got. She didn't know how fast you talked when she agreed to take notes. So I feel good about that. I also said we put together a CEU certificate, and I will have you sign that, and I'll send everything out to people in general. And then I know I'm going to put Kathy's email and my email on there. If this has been helpful, we meaning Kathy, is happy to do this again, just to continue supporting us as we're moving forward. So please tell us what you guys are needing and wanting. Any program documentation questions, I've kind of deferred those back to your coordinators, because right now we're all doing it differently. We're not doing it wrong or right. We're just doing it differently. So some of those I've deferred out. But again, let us know what you guys need and what you need help with as you're moving along.
So in closure, it was really good to see everybody's faces that I haven't seen in a long time. Trina, I love Trina. Hi, you guys. Thank you. So, Casey, hi. Good to see you too. And Angie, all my old friends. Thank you, guys. Please let me know. Hi, Susie. I see you too. If there's anything I can do to help you that you feel uncomfortable with or that you're unsure of, I'm more than happy to help in any way that I can. I love doing teletherapy, just like I love being a speech path. And I don't have any intention on going back and not doing face-to-face. I feel like teletherapy is where we're heading. And so I'm glad to see lots of people coming on board with this. I think it will be great for you guys. Okay?
Good seeing you, Kathy.
Good to see everybody. We'll go ahead and we'll leave the meeting. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.